Welcome, and thanks for joining this deep dive. You know that moment when you accidentally touch a hot pan? We've all been there. Well, today we're going way beyond just the ouch factor to look at the hard science of what's really happening inside your skin during a thermal burn. We're going to find out what the research says is the absolute best way to cool it down and why some common first aid advice might actually be doing more harm than good.
So let's start with a number that really puts this all into perspective: 180,000.
According to the World Health Organization, that's how many people die from burn injuries every single year. This isn't just a minor household accident we're talking about. It's a massive global health issue. And that's why knowing the right first aid isn't just helpful, it can literally be life-saving. Okay, so to understand a burn, you first have to understand the battlefield, and that's our skin. It's not just one simple covering. Think of it more like a three-layer shield. You've got the epidermis on the very top, which is your first line of defense. Then there's the tough, fibrous dermis in the middle. And finally, you have the deeper, fatty subcutaneous tissue. Each one has a critical job. So this leads us to the central question of this whole deep dive. How does all that heat, that thermal energy, actually travel down through these layers to cause so much damage? You see, it's not just about the surface getting hot. The real danger is how that heat keeps penetrating deeper and deeper, continuing to cook the tissue long after you've pulled your hand away from the stove. That's what these researchers were determined to figure out. To do this, they built what's called a finite element model, which is basically a super detailed, incredibly accurate computer simulation of human skin. Then they simulated a virtual hot disk, cranked it up to 90 degrees Celsius, and held it against this virtual skin for exactly 15 seconds. And here's the part that's actually kind of terrifying. In just 15 seconds, that's it, the damage is already done. The simulation showed that a second-degree burn had already formed near the skin's surface. It just proves that the clock starts ticking the absolute instant of contact. And that brings us to this really crucial point from this study. The damage itself is irreversible. But, and this is a huge but, further harm can be minimized with the right first aid. In other words, you can't hit undo on the initial burn, but you can absolutely stop it from getting worse. So the question is, what is the best way to do that? All right, so the researchers basically set up a race against the heat. They tested 5 different cooling methods. In this corner, we have just letting it cool in the air. Then there's submerging it in a water bath. We also have running cool water over it, applying ice directly, and even a fancy high-tech cryogenic spray. So, which one is going to be the champion? Now, let's get into the physics just for a second, because this is fascinating. There's something called a heat transfer coefficient, which is really just a scientific way of saying how good something is at pulling heat away from something else. And what's wild is that flowing water is literally twice as effective at yanking heat out of your skin as still water is. It's like having a superpowered heat magnet. So here it is, the ultimate test. Your tissue keeps taking on damage as long as it's above a critical temperature of about 42 degrees Celsius. So which one of our contenders can get the skin temperature down below that danger zone the quickest? And wow, this simulation gave us a really clear winner when it comes to pure speed. Putting ice directly on the burn is the fastest, no question. It drops the temperature below that critical point in just 28 seconds. Flowing water is a super close second at 32 seconds, and the water bath is right behind that at 35. But hang on, here's the twist. Speed isn't everything. The study is very quick to point out that while ice is the fastest, it's actually too aggressive. It can cause its own set of problems like frostbite or freezing the tissue, which is just more damage. So it's a really powerful tool, but it's also a really risky one. And what about that fancy cryogenic spray? Well, it turns out it was the least effective of them all. I know, surprising, right? While it's incredibly cold, it only cools a teeny tiny spot, and it leaves all the surrounding tissue to just keep on burning. It just couldn't cover enough ground to really make a difference. So when we look at the final scoreboard for overall cooling effectiveness, we see ice at the very top for raw power, but with that huge safety warning attached. And right behind it, offering this perfect balance of incredible speed and safety, is the flowing water jet. So let's just focus on this number for a second. 32 seconds.
That's how quickly the flowing water jet got the skin temperature down into the safe zone, stopping any further damage in its tracks. According to the science, this makes it the most effective and the most practical first aid method. It's super fast, and it doesn't come with all those dangerous risks that ice does.
All right, so what are the big takeaways from all this? First, you have got to act fast. Remember, the burn keeps burning on the inside. Second, running cool water over the area is the gold standard. It's incredibly effective and it's safe. Third, resist that instinct to just grab ice from the freezer. It can actually cause more harm than good. And finally, hey, if you can't get to a running tap, just submerging the burn in cool water is still a really, really good option. You know, this research really makes you think, doesn't it? What's in your first aid kit? It turns out you don't need fancy sprays or special gadgets. According to this science, the most powerful tool you can have for treating a burn is something we all have, a simple tap with cool running water. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the science of treating burns. We really hope you found it insightful and maybe a little empowering. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.